Welcome to everyone. I'm Tim Peterson, a senior reporter at Digiday. I cover TV and streaming and digital video side of the industries in particular. And with us today is Christy Tanner, EVP and GM of CBS News Digital. Welcome, Christy.
Thanks, Tim.
Before we get into the conversation, just a kind of a bit of the state of the industry right now. So as I'm sure many people are aware, streaming viewership has really soared. These are stats from Nielsen, just looking at the amount of time people are spending streaming video during the quarantine compared to last year. Obviously, it's up, about double in terms of minutes viewed. And then these are stats from ComScore just showing how much of a surge there has been in streaming viewership since the quarantine began. So you can see the week of March 9th was a bit at normal. Then March 16th, when the lockdown really started for most people, that was when things just shot up and have stayed pretty high since then. These stat from Amazon Fire TV, they've seen a 20% increase in watch time for live and free ad-supported streaming apps. So it's not just Netflix or Amazon Prime Video that are getting the bulk of viewership, but there's really interest in live video as well as free and ad-supported video. News viewership in particular has surged. News has basically replaced sports as the predominant live programming genre. On cable TV, there's been a 3x increase in the time spent watching cable news, according to Samba TV. And on YouTube, YouTube's seen a 75% increase in video views for news videos. However, as much as viewership is up, advertising is down. Obviously, we've been writing a lot about how advertisers have pulled back or cut down on costs as their businesses deal with the pandemic. These are some stats from eMarketer just forecasting what the hit will be to TV ad spending as well as digital video ad spending this year. And then news outlets in particular have had to deal with some of these hits a bit more acutely than others, just because there is that wariness among advertisers of being next to the news right now. There's also something of an aspect where advertisers just don't have the right messaging, but we are starting to see that begin to shift as advertisers create new PSA style ads and feel a responsibility as well as an opportunity to advertise against the news, given the viewership and also just the significance of the news right now. So to talk more about the news, we're going to welcome Christy Tanner from CBS News Digital, talk about how to stream the news during a pandemic. Welcome, Christy, again.
Thanks, Tim. Hi. So I am going to share my screen now. Hi, everybody. I run CBS News Digital. That encompasses cbsnews.com as well as our 24/7 streaming service, CBSN, which is available on more than 20 devices, services, and platforms. I'll walk you through some of the mechanics of where you can find it and how it works, and then talk about some of the things we've adjusted to in the pandemic and where we think this is all heading right now. So let's see. I always think it's good to think about our viewers and what they're going through. We try to keep our audience at the center of everything we do. And so this is a real note. I have a few others that I'll share throughout the course of this that somebody wrote in. What you do is more important now than ever before in our nation's and broadcasting history. I'm alone in my home. You're my link to humanity, a lifeline. And this is interesting that this person put in, especially for those of us who eschew social media. Thank you for your service. So this encapsulates, I think, a lot of how people are feeling right now and how they view news. The portrayal of news as a polarized place, an untrustworthy place, is something that we think at CBS News and certainly other broadcast brands are trusted right now. Viewership is surging. And what we have built in digital and streaming is meant to serve those viewers. This is also one of our team, and this is a new normal for one of our team, who's had to go back into our office building to reboot a machine and sent us a picture. Obviously, he's there all by himself with a mask and gloves on. The other new reality is that our homes are now control rooms. So this was somebody's living room, and you can see that they've set up their home television to look exactly like what you would see in our control room in the CBS News Broadcast Center. And really, this is representative of everyone on our team. Every single digital team member is working from home. Our anchors are working from home. Our video editors are editing video in the cloud from home. Our producers are producing from home. Our writers are writing from home. Our social team, everything, 100% of our operation has been reconfigured, reinvented to allow everybody to do their jobs remotely. And we do expect that they will be doing their jobs remotely for some time to come. Going backwards a little bit, what is CBS News Digital and CBSN? We have been doing this for 5 years. We launched our streaming service, CBSN, in late 2014, so it's been 5.5 years. We are now on more than 20 devices, services, and platforms. Our average age is 37. We really strive to be a nonpartisan source of news at all times. And we recently, in the past 1.5 years, have launched 9 of 13 planned local versions of CBSN. Taking an even further step back, CBS and Viacom completed their merger a short time ago. When you roll up all of Viacom and CBS's digital assets, we're the 6th largest digital company in the US after Microsoft, Amazon, Verizon, Facebook, Google. So when you drill down on that, we are a leader in the industry as well. When we talk about creating a powerful network for CBSN, our live 24/7 streaming service, we're also part of All Access. We stream live news in CBS All Access, which is CBS's SVOD equivalent to Netflix. We have a live sports streaming service called Sports HQ that's run by our sports division. And as I mentioned, 9 local versions of CBSN. We have 13 owned and operated TV stations, and we plan for each one of those to have its own local continuous news stream by the end of this year. And this slide kind of shows you how we put it all together. CBS News Digital's at the center of this universe in which all of CBS Interactive brands are part of it. Our broadcast brands are all part of it. These local owned and operated stations and the streams that they're starting are part of it. And then obviously our partners for distribution and the platforms such as Roku, Amazon, and Apple, among others. When you look at how we incorporate these products into a network, you can see on the left within All Access, you can see your live local affiliate as well as CBSN, as well as the sports stream, and ET Live, which is this streaming service from Entertainment Tonight. There's within CBS News, again, we're giving everybody access to all the local streams, as well as sports and ET. So this universe is really expanding rapidly, and I think the coronavirus crisis has highlighted more than ever what we can do with it. So we right now on the main CBSN, which I'm looking at, we have Trump is speaking live from the White House. But if I went to Boston, the governor of Massachusetts is speaking on CBSN Boston. Governor Cuomo is speaking live on CBSN New York. Some of our other local streams, well, in Minnesota, there's a story on Do You Believe in UFOs, which if you've seen that video, you may start believing in UFOs. It's starting to make the rounds. But we're able to take these live events during the pandemic that everybody wants to see, whether it's Cuomo or Trump or a more local version of the Massachusetts governor. We're able to have that up to the minute information about what is going on in your community. And we've seen this play out over the course of the last few weeks when, let's say, the day that de Blasio and Cuomo made the decision to shut down the schools. That's really vital information that people need to have. And we're able to run that live no matter what is going on in broadcast TV. This just tells you the markets where we're going to be having our live local streams. Obviously, there's a ton of demand. I think, yes, viewership for news is up on all fronts, on cable, on broadcast, on streaming. This just shows you how much it's up by. It's a massive amount. Usually for CBSN and its history, when we've had big bumps and things come back down to earth, they tend not to go back to where they were before. We know that we're converting people to streaming news when we have events like this where we draw a large new audience. One of the reasons that converts people and keeps them coming back is we've really made a tremendous effort over the last few years to make sure that our team reflects the audience we seek. It is tend to be a younger demographic when our average age is 37 and the average age for some cable and broadcast outlets would be 20, 30 years older. They're diverse. We don't really have to think too much, try too hard, give too much guidance to our team to book both men and women, to book people of color to talk every single day. It's kind of second nature now. We really don't really have to work very hard to remind our team of that. And that's definitely not something that we see on other outlets. These pictures are all from the Democratic debate that CBS News hosted in February. And this was really a team effort with broadcast and digital working together to provide coverage before the debate, after the debate. These are all the presidential candidates at the time, if you can even remember their names. There once were at least a dozen, actually 24, I think, Democratic contenders. Now I can quiz you on whether you remember that Pete Buttigieg was a candidate for the Democratic nomination. Here's another quote from one of our team. So people, I think, tend to view cord cutters maybe as being a little bit more urban. And that is, we do see spikes in urban areas of viewers, but our audience is diverse, and it does ultimately tend to play out the way the population plays out. So the most populous states are the biggest states for CBSN. And we have viewers in places like North Dakota, such as this person, who's thanking us for our journalism, being aware of what's going on in the world. This is from a few weeks ago. Rural North Dakota, as we know, doesn't have a ton of coronavirus cases. But people, I think, we always try to give our audience credit for being dialed into not only the national picture, but the global picture. Everybody wants local news, which is why we launched these local streams. But our audience also is very interested in international news as well. And so we are able to make use of the bureaus that we have around the world, to bring a heavier balance of international news to the CBSN streaming audience. We were spending quite a lot more time on coronavirus as it was breaking out in China and then later in Italy than maybe some of our other news outlets were. Not only because we have time, but we really make an effort to work with the international bureaus of CBS News. And we're fortunate to be able to have access to those people covering those places. We also take deeper dives, and here's an example of some of the documentaries that we've done in the past few years on topics that range from fires in the Amazon to minimum wage and those who survive on tips, as well as climate change. Rising tide price out in Miami is really about climate, the adverse impact of climate change on communities of color and with lower socioeconomic prospects. So all of these topics, I think, are deep dives that our audience has shown themselves to be really, really interested in over time. And we'll end with, on a more positive note, I think it is obviously a really, really rough time for people who are dealing with the virus and everything that entails, as well as economic hardship, whether it's the challenges of homeschooling your children to more life-threatening challenges such as, do I have the virus or not? We're obviously providing people with the most up-to-date information on all of those topics. We do try to have fun when we can, and we try to focus on the stories of people and not just statistics. So there's certainly a lot of good news out there as well. And that really concludes the slideshow. So I know I had seen some questions come in before we started the slides. Tim, what do you want the sequence of operations to be?
Yep. So I'll be a little bit selfish at first. Got a few questions of my own, but anyone who's watching, if you do have questions, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom. You can just put your questions in there. I'll be checking it intermittently. We already got a few great ones come through, and I'll be asking those through the course of the conversation. One place I'd love to start. So we talked about, this viewership surge that everyone's seeing right now, particularly news outlets. You had the slide showing the uptick that CBSN has seen in March, but you also saw like a pretty notable increase in January and February, I imagine having to do with the primaries. But with March, with so many people searching for the news, was there anything in particular that CBSN did to drive more viewership to the streaming service beyond, organically what you would have coming?
Well, I think one of the a new funnel for us and a major funnel has been our local owned and operated TV stations. So each of the 9 that have launched a companion streaming service have done an incredible job of promoting the stream to their viewers. So we have seen growth in the markets where we have local streams, because those watching on linear are realizing they can get more local news. And then to do that, you've got to download the CBS News app. And so when people go there to find, let's say, CBSN Boston, they're finding CBSN National, but they also may be finding CBSN Los Angeles and CBSN Minnesota. We've made them all available. We don't geolocate the local streaming service that's targeting to you. And we have found that people kind of do watch a little bit of everything. and I myself have been watching a lot more of the local streams just since I've more time and I'm constantly standing in front of my TV. And uh, and how Boston was dealing with the pandemic was actually just as interesting to me as a New Yorker as what's going on in New York. So I think that's one of the takeaways here is that everything's kind of feeding everything else. New York's feeding Boston, is feeding the National, is feeding Minnesota, um, but maybe what we presume people's regional and parochial interests is not necessarily true. People who live in Boston are just as interested in an interesting story from San Francisco.
Right.
And another way we promoted it, just to finish answering your question, is we actually did buy advertising, and advertising, as I think all of Digiday users know, actually advertising works.
What advertising worked in particular for you?
Well, first of all, we've been doing more promos on our own services, but we've done buys on some of the platforms, and so wherever we can buy ads, not every platform has as robust of an operation that allows one to buy promotional ads, but Roku is a very a promotional platform that we've used, and even if you turn on your Roku right now, you might see one of our ads. Amazon, Samsung, we're buying at the bottom of the funnel on these platforms, people who are making a decision on what to watch right now.
Got it. And you were doing some of that before all of this. Were there any tweaks that you had to make though recently?
Well, in this case, we actually are promoting that we have coronavirus coverage. So we tweaked the creative to be specific to coronavirus, and we also did some local versions of it. So we did some geo-targeting for the Boston version of CBSN, for instance, and some of the other local versions.
Got it. And Roku, Samsung, those are connected TV platforms or smart TV platforms. A lot of people hold at home right now. Are you seeing the bulk of the viewership be on the TV?
Great question. We're actually seeing, yes, the bulk of the viewing is and has always been on connected TVs and connected TV platforms. That's where people watch the longest. We've always had really robust traffic, though, also on desktop and mobile. And we have not seen that diminish, which has been interesting. So we are still seeing really robust mobile traffic, though obviously many of these people are at home watching on their mobile devices. When we do mobile pushes to the stream, we see mobile viewership spike. And that's true for the national stream as well as the local streams. I would say this goes back to, there are some analysts out there who will tell you that your phone is a TV. And we have been seeing this for years. And I would say the time that the light bulb really went off for all of us was the royal wedding of Harry and Meghan, which the royal wedding started at around 4 a.m, all the pomp and circumstance. And so we assumed, we did some advertising back then promoting that we were going to be carrying the royal wedding. And we did all of our advertising on connected TVs because we thought people will wake up early and they'll turn on their television and they'll watch the wedding. But we also did a mobile push notification when the wedding started. And really what we assume happened, because we saw such a huge mobile spike that just stayed with it for the duration of the event. What we assume is that people rolled over at 4 a.m, got the push notification, started watching the wedding on their phones, and just watched the whole thing and never got out of bed and never turned on their TV. I think that is also happening with people at home. And you can sort of see just from the New York case study, I'm in my bedroom, my husband's in the dining room working, my daughter's in the living room doing homeschooling. And so I'm not going to the TV in the living room to watch the news. I often personally have a phone, an iPad, and my desktop, my laptop, streaming the news from my bunker here.
Got it. Okay. And with the viewership, like obviously the first few weeks, people couldn't get enough of the story. They wanted to find out as much as possible because it was all very new. There was a lot of misinformation out there. Things were changing minute by minute. But as we've gotten, now I think we're in week 6 of the quarantine period. Have you seen any viewership drop off, or have you had to make any adjustments to your coverage?
Well, March was the number 1 month for CBSN, as we've seen by a pretty wide margin. April will be our number 2 month. And so but they'll still be pretty close. So it's not going to be a dramatic drop off, but there is a bit of a softening. Definitely in the first couple weeks, as state by state closed down, as different really major announcements were made, we were seeing off the charts spikes. I think certainly the first few presidential task force briefings were huge, and people are still watching those. Sometimes, though, the Cuomo daily press conference draws the same numbers as nationally as Trump. And some of the state governors draw a really big audience. Newsom also draws a big audience. A lot of that's just population based. But I think for some people, once they had seen a few task force briefings, they felt like they'd seen it all. And there are, some people, again, don't necessarily want to see their governor talk every single day if that particular governor is not incredibly informative. So I think it really depends. And we're not just running governors, but also people, at some point they do have to do work.
Right.
And I think I couldn't 100% correlate this, but I would say, I think the first few weeks when schools started shutting down, but the schools hadn't really figured out the remote learning, that was probably when we saw most of our viewership. And then once remote learning started back up again, there might be a little softness in those hours when people are trying to keep their kids focused on school.
Okay, yeah, because I was
That
curious,
is pure speculation, though.
Right. But so that softening, has that been in watch time, and are you seeing it in particular parts of the day? Are some day parts not seeing the same viewership now that they were seeing a month ago?
It's such mild softness. I don't even think it's like a double-digit diminishment. I haven't looked at it super closely. It's going to be April's going to be a very close number 2 to March. So it's a slight softening, I would say, okay. But it's not going off a cliff. Okay.
And how do you program against that? Like, obviously you want to be covering the briefings, covering the news, but you also have originals. And, as much as this is the biggest story, certainly of my lifetime, there's other news out there right now. How have you managed the mix?
Well, we are again, one of the mixes is the global aspect of the news. And so as other countries are opening up, we're able to spend some time doing some deep dives on CBSN on what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in Sweden and Denmark, which are all places that have had different approaches to the virus and are starting to have they're at different points in the curve. So some of it's just widening from what's happening in the States, what's happening in your area. And then some of it is really counter programming. Like I said, we do try to give people a break. And so one of the things that we did just to create blocks of a break is we are taking some of our more arts and culture focused pieces from our Saturday and Sunday shows, which tend to have a heavier dose of that, and putting them together in blocks of programming on the weekend so that people can really take a break and just watch, 5 episodes, 5 segments of The Dish, which is the food show that's on a Saturday morning show at a time.
Got it. And then on the production side, obviously no one's in a studio right now, or very few people are in studios right now. I think the NFL draft, there was one person in the studio, it looked like. But what has been the biggest adjustment CBS News has had to make when it comes to producing the news right now, and especially now that we're in a month and a half into this? What are the biggest changes that you're currently making, or what adjustments are you thinking of making moving forward?
Well, I think just it's some of our basic functions are just slower. So when somebody records a piece and we're uploading it, it can take, based on it's the time it takes to upload can be based on someone's home broadband provider, and it can take 5 times longer for someone to upload a video from home as it would in the office. And so I would say that sort of the clunkiness that comes from just being remote and working remote and relying on smaller pipes is probably the single biggest factor that is causing a pain point for people. If everybody had pipes in their home as big as we have in the CBS News Broadcast Center, we could probably be remote forever with no frustration.
Okay. Because we have a question from Dina Pott. Are there any shifts in the way news is being produced or consumed during the COVID crisis that you think will change the way CBSN does its work moving forward?
Yeah. So, yes, I think that we will. I think remote production will now become a norm. And I don't think every function will be remote forever, but I also think we're going to be in this cycle for quite some time. And the buildings from which we produce the news are only so big. And so to be able to do this with social distancing, we are probably going to have some portion of our team work remotely at any given time for the foreseeable future. And so some of the skills and the systems and workflows that we've created to deal with this will be very useful going forward. In terms of our approach to the actual news, that hasn't changed much. The questions we're asking, the way we ask them, telling stories, that hasn't changed. I would say, maybe I would say it's been interesting for me to watch the consumption of local news, because I've known for some time that people who live in the New York metro area are also watching Los Angeles news and are also watching Minnesota news. But I think there's actually more we could do with local stories that are of national interest, and that's one thing I think we might work on coming out of this.
How are you incorporating the local coverage into the national feed now?
Well, we actually have started several years ago a feature called Local Matters that was probably 80% about politics. So it started with some of these very hot and contentious Senate and congressional races, where we would bring in local reporters to give us more depth and insight into these local races. And so Um, we've, I would say, expanded that in this crisis to incorporate local approaches to the virus, um, in addition to these just politics and horse races.
Got it. And then, like, the misinformation, especially those first few weeks in March, you could watch it. I mean, last week you could have watched a briefing come away thinking you're supposed to be huffing Lysol. How do you, to what extent does having a streaming service enable you to kind of contend with that misinformation and really nip it in the bud?
Well, it is. We're fortunate to be able to have the time and the space, for instance, to analyze and fact check news conference when it's happening, and we don't do that. Let's say with graphics on the screen to say don't drink bleach, but we are able to provide that analysis as soon as it ends, and I would say and that's one area where our approach really hasn't changed, because there was misinformation on a lot of topics and disinformation being spread, and those basic journalism 101 practices really haven't changed, which is we still need multiple sources to verify claims, and we have a whole system of journalistic checks and balances that existed prior to the virus and continues.
What about on the business side? Like, obviously we've seen across the board, any advertising supported business has been impacted. How has CBSN been impacted, and how have you dealt with those impacts, or are you trying to deal with those impacts?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely been some news coverage about just uh, a trend that had existed prior to the virus, which is there's certain advertisers who were shying away from news because they thought it was too hot or too controversial for their brands. But one of the things that we've seen, and a lot of work's been done on that by DCN, the 4As. There's tons of research out there saying news is trusted news brands are a safe environment for brand advertising. There's literally, I could name 5 or 6 prominent research studies that are third party that would tell you that. But with the virus, one of the interesting things that we've seen is obviously we have a ton of ad inventory on CBSN. And we have had some advertisers whose campaigns couldn't run in other verticals because there wasn't enough inventory, let's say, or they had a sponsorship of sports that just couldn't take place anymore. So, or maybe there's a few that are first-time news advertisers. And one of the bright spots for us has been that there are a number of advertisers who are advertising for the first time in news because of that inventory issue, and have had a really great experience and found that their sales went up. So now they're coming back and doing news-only buys. So I wouldn't say that that's, a full-blown trend just yet, but it's definitely something that we've seen that makes us realize the picture isn't entirely gloom and doom.
All right. And with that, have you made any programming adjustments to kind of what the segments or that editorial is that appears before or after an ad, so that it's not the latest death count or layoffs, but it's something about, hey, here's how people are coping in quarantine, or what people are what shows people are streaming, things like that?
Yeah, we haven't made those types of adjustments. We also haven't been asked. We haven't been asked to rearrange our segments, and we're actually continuing to do custom content. So we have some sponsored series in financial services, and in some ways those are more relevant than ever. How do you manage your finances? How do you do your taxes? And we're continuing to do those, and we're continuing to receive RFPs for sponsored content.
Okay.
So
And beyond the more PSA style approach, are you seeing any other differences in the RFPs that are coming in, or the types of content advertisers are looking to produce with CBS?
I think I'm trying to think. Some had paused their sponsored um, deals initially, but those are starting to turn back on.
Okay.
So I think everybody's starting to anticipate business getting going, and how will they support their customers. You know, we see it every day. We see it with our own ad buys on the platforms that at there's a reason advertising exists. It actually does work.
And then, as a closing question, the first question we got in from Lisa Kay asked about: do you feel the COVID-19 story will continue to evolve? How are you thinking about evolving the coverage moving forward, covering it in perhaps different ways than you have been, or really doubling down in certain approaches?
Well, I think the way the story will evolve is we're very focused on really rapidly breaking news when this first started. Now we're starting to go more in depth and understand things. And I think you will start to see more investigative, in-depth pieces as time goes on. So let's just take the first wave of PPP. Initially, what people were coming to us for information on was, how do I apply for PPP? Then the next wave was, oh, guess who got the money, but maybe didn't really deserve it and is now returning that money. We still haven't fully seen the list of who got it and done the analysis on that. And so that's just an example of one type of story where we need the time and we need the information to go back and do the real analysis on, turns out percentage of companies who actually got the money versus those who didn't, where we're able to provide more facts and more in-depth information there. So I think there will be a lot more in-depth information coming on. There's still so much we don't know about the virus, how you get it, what it does to you, can it come back, are you immune? There's so many open questions that we still have an ongoing, really breaking medical story at the same time that the economy continues to break. And I think those questions will remain open for quite some time.
Okay. Those questions will remain open. Unfortunately, we have to close the questions for this one. That is all for this week's edition of Digiday Talks with Christy Tanner from CBS News Digital. Christy, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to all the viewers for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.